Oh, hey, it's good to see you again. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of See It Again Cinema. Tonight's featured film is Rocky. Came out in 1976, won the Oscar for Best Picture. Written by and starring Sylvester Stallone in his breakout role. So, I've actually only seen this movie one time. It was about 10 years ago. And the reason I've decided to rewatch it is my next episode that has a guest will feature my good friend Mauricio. And we are going to rewatch Rocky 4. In between this episode and that one, I've got to watch Rocky 2 and 3. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation about that. Because over the years, you hear certain things and jokes and see memes, or people seem to share their opinions on how they feel about certain franchises. There's not a whole lot I'm curious about from what I remember of the film, other than I remember Rocky is used as a counterexample to screenplay formulas. Some people know about Save the Cat, this kind of scene by scene, beat by beat guide to how to make a perfect 2-hour Hollywood movie. And yet, if you look at Rocky, it doesn't follow that formula at all, which I think is really remarkable because it shows that when there's a new story told about a very relatable character in a fresh new way, can really appeal to audiences. It can stand out and not seem like the same old, same old. Number 1, director John G. Avildsen had never actually attended a professional boxing match or even seen a boxing movie before he signed on for this picture. So I wonder if there are people who, as much as they enjoyed the story, if there are certain moments where they're like, hey, that's not actually what would happen in a boxing match. Maybe he had some really good advisors. Number 2, a lot of people know about Sylvester Stallone's underdog story about how much he and his family were struggling financially before he was able to sell the script. I guess he had to sell his dog, his beloved dog Butkus, for $50. Once he sold the script, he bought the dog back. So that's a heartwarming story. Number 3, at the climactic Apollo Creed Rocky Balboa fight scene, the makers of the film wanted to get real former heavyweight champions to attend that match. But only one was able to show up, and that was Joe Frazier, which ended up working pretty well, considering that Joe Frazier was a resident of Philadelphia. Number 4, the scene where Rocky and Adrian kiss in the kitchen was different than it was originally scripted because Talia Shire had the flu on the day they were supposed to film, and she was quite hesitant and was trying to keep her distance from Rocky, and that ended up adding to the energy of the scene. And it got me thinking about how many good scenes, perfectly fine scenes in movies have been enhanced because one of the actors happened to be sick the day they were filming. I'm thinking of Gene Kelly dancing to Singin' in the Rain. I'm thinking of Harrison Ford in Raiders of the Lost Ark when he shoots the guy with the scimitar just because he wasn't physically up to doing all the fight choreography. Is this a secret history of the flu's influence on filmmaking? Number 5. With this film, Sylvester Stallone became only the second person ever to write an original screenplay where they starred in the lead role and were nominated for Oscars for both writing and acting. The other actor and writer was Charlie Chaplin for his satirical film, The Great Dictator. Just goes to show you, maybe sometimes the Oscars reward the little guy. Speaking of the Oscars, this is mere speculation, but if Rocky had not won Best Picture, I have a feeling, a number of years later, Martin Scorsese's amazing boxing film, Raging Bull, probably would have beat out ordinary people at the Oscars. I can see how perhaps the Academy was wringing their hands, going, "Oh, we can't have two best pictures about boxing. We're the Oscars, not the boxers." Well, all right. It's time to begin and watch Rocky again. We'll catch you after the credits roll. Ding, ding, ding.
See it again, see it again. Cinema, 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 see it again, see it again. And then talk about it.
Ding. And we're back. Wow. So that film is almost a half century old and it still holds up. What a satisfying story, a feel-good underdog plot. Some of the things I really enjoyed. First off, Stallone equals Rocky. You know, there was never a moment where I didn't believe the reality of that character, of what motivated him, how he walked, how he talked. He just physically inhabits the role of that character, and I think that's what helps with the realism of the film. I really appreciated the direction. I think Avildsen and the cinematographers do a wonderful job at depicting Philadelphia as a hard scrabble city that's dealing with, the recession, and making it look like it's a tough city, to kind of get ahead in. The story's set in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, but wow, there doesn't seem to be much brotherly love, especially the way Paulie treats his sister. One thing I noticed this time is how often the camera is filmed from a lower angle, to where we're kind of looking from the feet up. It's subtle, but it does position us into feeling like identifying more with the underdog. I thought the music was really great, the way it just subtly built up to the themes that you eventually hear during the famous Steadicam training montage when he runs up the steps the second time. One thing I noticed this time around is the almost Steinbeckian loneliness of the main characters. A lot of people are isolated, or if they're not isolated, they're stuck with someone who tells them what to do. Rocky's mob boss, Gazzo, tells him not to think and let him do the figuring. Adrian works in the pet store, and the pet store owner, tells her what to do. Some of that loneliness for Rocky is he doesn't have any neighbors. He doesn't have any buddies. It sounds like Paulie is only his friend because, he wants to get with his sister. Rocky lives alone. He has no phone, no siblings, no cousins, no family to speak of. We don't, really find out what happened to his parents or whether they're living or not. He doesn't really have friends. When he walks down the street, people recognize him. Everyone says like, "Hey, Rocky, hey, Rock," and they seem to know he's a boxer, and that's the thing he's trying to gain his identity around. But, you don't see a neighbor knocking on the door say, "Hey, Rocky, me and a couple of guys going down to the bowling alley. Thought you might want to throw some balls. Maybe you'll actually be able to hit those pins this time." I think this depiction of loneliness, of showing him in his home and in his community, but not really feeling connected, is a way that the audience empathizes with Rocky and also sees why he so much wants to connect with Adrian and also have success in the boxing ring. I mean, just look at the street he lives on. Doesn't seem like anyone else lives on that street. You never see anyone walking their dog or sweeping the stoop. There are obviously practical realities to low-budget filmmaking. Perhaps they had to choose an abandoned part of town, which just adds to his character that he can only afford to live someplace that is just dying from a residential and economic circumstance. Now, I'm going to talk about two of the subtexts that I picked up this time, and I'm going to start with the more obvious one, which is the religious subtext. The very first shot of the film shows Jesus in that painting above the boxing ring. And when you think about Jesus as an underdog, there's some Christian symbolism and allusions throughout. For instance, when Rocky walks that girl home, her name is Marie. Marie is a Latin variation of Mary, and Rocky is concerned about her reputation and that she'll be viewed as a whore. I imagine that even back in the 1970s, there were audiences that bristled at Rocky's well-intentioned but perhaps heavy-handed approach to caring for Marie. But what I think this one scene does is it sets up the Madonna whore dynamic that will later come to fruition when Paulie gets upset about the idea that his friend Rocky is sleeping with his sister. You know, Talia Shire is wonderful in this role. This is kind of a big role that was outside of the world of her brother's filmmaking, Francis Ford Coppola and the Godfather films. And yeah, watching it now, I'm like, wow, this is obviously a lot like the story of She's All That, and with Rachel Lee Cook ditching the glasses, letting her hair down, going from like kind of a shy, nerdy girl to like a sexy, glamorous girl. Is Freddie Prinze Jr. a Rocky throwback in She's All That? I don't know.
Oh, wow. It turns out there is a connection between these two films. After searching a little bit, I learned that Freddie Prinze Jr. named his first son Rocky James Prinze. I'm guessing because he really identifies with Stallone's first role as a leading man, because She's All That was FPJ's first lead role. So there you go.
Immediately after the scene where Paulie is concerned about the sexual adventurousness or his sister's sexual expression, there's this shot of Paulie's living room, and we see a painting that we haven't seen yet. And there's this, very beautiful image of a girl, and then kind of the darker turn to the right. To me, this seems to reinforce in a subtle way the Madonna whore binary that a lot of Christians get caught up in. Also, think about the story of Jesus and the manger. Rocky refers to his pets, the turtles and the goldfish. He refers to them as animals, and so maybe there's a subtle nod to the manger story. Just like a lot of people found the story of Jesus in a low situation, rising to become like the champion, the son of God. I think a lot of people really enjoy the story of Rocky for that reason. I think it's important to consider how this film is so intertwined with the time period in which it was released. The 70s, very turbulent decade, following all of the cultural change of the 1960s. And I think a lot of people were losing some faith in the American dream and just what direction America would take. So, is Rocky the savior of American democracy and capitalism? There is this linking of the 200-year history of the United States to the bicentennial and what Apollo Creed wants to do. One thing I picked up on this time is there's the promoter Juergens, who he doesn't have a British accent, but in his mannerisms and dress, he strikes me as kind of a British businessman. Think about when Juergens says, I've promoted fights all over the world. Well, it's like, yeah, wherever the British Empire went, violence happened. Apollo sees Rocky Balboa as descended from Christopher Columbus, and what did that engender but the 400-year slave trade. He wants this rematch. I think it's almost as if Apollo Creed is representing the entire history of enslaved Africans brought to this country because of Christopher Columbus. And so it's a way to get revenge on them. Before the big match, Rocky goes and walk around the ring and he looks at the posters and he talks to Juergens and says, "Hey, there's a mistake on that painting. My shorts are white with a red stripe. And that's showing me in red shorts with a white stripe." Juergens basically dismisses it and says, "Does it really matter?" And, that to me was a subtle clue that they're trying to dress Rocky up as a red coat so that perhaps Apollo Creed, Apollo is the messenger to the gods. What does he believe? Does he want to get his revenge on the Italians who discovered the New World and also on the British for colonizing this country? Right at the end of the 15th round, one thing I caught this time is when Apollo is saying, "There won't be a rematch. There won't be a rematch," which I think is interesting because if their whole fight is somehow supposed to be a proxy or a metaphor for the history of America, the truth is there isn't a rematch. We can't take all of the actors, the fighters, the revolutionaries, and the governments and peoples and just put them in a ring and rematch. We can only go forward. Now, what I think is interesting is he says there won't be a rematch, but I know that there is a rematch in Rocky 2. So as I continue through this film series, I'm curious, do they continue with this ongoing theme about the future of America and American democracy and capitalism, especially while the Cold War is going on? Or does that get dropped, or does it get played up in different ways, maybe in cartoonier ways? I don't know. I just know that for a lot of audiences, after dealing with the Vietnam War, the recession, the disillusionment in government with Watergate, I can see why audiences really responded so positively to this underdog story. And even though he doesn't technically win, he has a moral victory. He wasn't knocked out. He wasn't out in 3 rounds. He went the full 15 rounds. And he's got the love of Adrian, which seems more important, that they're finally together at the end. So let's get to that ending. I wish I could have been in the theaters in 1976 to feel the electricity of that packed theater. There's a beautiful mirroring effect of the boxing ring convention hall being like the packed movie theater. And I think that feeling the energy in the room as it built to that climax would have just been so satisfying. Speaking of emotionally satisfying climaxes, it seems that Hollywood has forgotten how to consistently deliver these. I love movies that deliver that payoff and then quickly end. Movies like Vertigo, North by Northwest, Star Wars, Top Gun 1 and 2. So I'm curious to see where they go with this character and how the films develop. And I hope that you come back for my guest episode with Mauricio when we watch Rocky 4, because I think we're going to have a great conversation. So what about you? Do you have a favorite Rocky film? If so, what is it? Let us know in the comments below. All right. That'll do it for this episode of See It Again Cinema, where old movies make magical new memories. Thanks for rewatching, and we'll see you next time. Pow!
See it again, see it again. Cinema, see it again, see it again.
Little bonus fact. This movie cost $1.1 million to make, and the biggest part of the budget was on makeup.